The Omega Point was final. Humans turned it into a way station. The theoretical conclusion of universal evolution became a waypoint when human explorers ventured to the deepest edges of existence, treating the final fate of the universe as just another frontier to explore and conquer. In 2065, Dr. Meridian Cross discovered the Omega Point, a theoretical synthesis of all consciousness. Located 47 light-years away, she led the most ambitious journey in human history, hoping to uncover the ultimate evolutionary form of awareness. But what they encountered was something beyond understanding, a being that had achieved unity through the annihilation of the self. To the humans, this was not transcendence, but annihilation, a price too high, yet what they found proved otherwise. Consciousness, it turned out, could sustain both individuality and unity at once. This discovery redefined the Omega Point, no longer the end of the road, but a doorway to infinite possibility. Conscious evolution wasn't a destination, it was a horizon that kept expanding. Dr. Meridian Cross had always chased the impossible. For 37 years, she lived on the fringe of theoretical physics, crafting ideas that made her colleagues uncomfortable and left financiers uncertain. But even she wasn't prepared for what flashed across her monitor at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. What the Kepler Observatory found wasn't a new star or drifting planet. It was an energy signature, impossibly perfect, violently organized, that shattered every known physical law. No natural object could produce it. No random event could explain it. This was something different. This was the Omega Point. The concept had first been proposed decades earlier by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, and mathematically explored by Frank Tipler. The Omega Point was supposed to be the endgame of existence, a moment when every particle and quantum of energy would converge into a single, boundless intelligence, a supermind encompassing all. But Meridian's calculations didn't just confirm the theory, they pinpointed it, real, measurable, and out in the Draco constellation. She grabbed her phone and called her research partner, Dr. Thaddeus Brennan, her most trusted ally for over a decade. After 6 rings, a groggy voice answered, "Meridian, it's 3 in the morning. This better be good. Thaddeus, I'm sending you the data stream now. You need to see this." She imagined him stumbling toward his laptop, hair wild, eyes squinting at the glow. "These numbers can't be right," he muttered. "To generate energy at this level, you'd need the mass of several galaxies crushed into something smaller than the solar system. The gravitational force alone would produce exactly that signature." Meridian interrupted. "Thaddeus, we've found it. The Omega Point isn't just a theory. It's real, and it's active right now." Within hours, the observatory lit up. The world's top minds rushed to examine the data. Word spread like lightning, and the implications were staggering. If the Omega Point existed, if it was attainable, then the boundary between thought and matter might dissolve. Intelligence could become limitless. "Would you like me to continue polishing the next section?" You said. "Do not make it short, just correct the grammar," ChatGPT said. "Here's the full text, with grammar corrected and refined but not shortened or altered in style. The Omega Point was final. Humans turned it into a way station. The theoretical conclusion of universal evolution serves as a waypoint when human explorers venture to the furthest reaches of existence, treating the final fate of the universe as a new frontier in need of subjugatio. In 2065, Dr. Meridian Cross finds the Omega Point, a theoretical synthesis of all minds, 47 light-years away in space. She is leading the longest journey humanity has ever attempted to search for this phenomenon, hoping that the ultimate evolutionary product of consciousness is what she is looking for. Instead, they meet something that has achieved unity through the death of the individual self, which the humans argue is an unnecessary dissolution, not genuine transcendence. Their encounter demonstrates that consciousness is capable of sustaining both the individual and the collective as one. This finding converts the Omega Point from an endpoint into a new beginning and reveals that the evolution of consciousness is an infinite exploration of possibilities rather than convergence at a single point. Dr. Meridian Cross had spent her entire career researching the impossible. She had spent 37 years on the fringe of theoretical physics, developing ideas that made her peers queasy and financiers jittery. But it was 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, and nothing had prepared her for what the data streaming across her monitors would reveal. What the Kepler Observatory had discovered was magically an incredibly impossible signature that violated every known law of physics. Not just some exoplanet or distant galaxy, but a focal point of energy and matter so perfectly organized that there was no alternative explanation. Electromagnetic signatures of the Omega Point. This concept had been hypothesized decades earlier by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin and mathematically modeled by Frank Tipler. The omega point described the hypothetical final form of universal evolution when every particle of matter and quantum of energy would join together in a single mind of limitless complexity and intelligence. It was theorized to be the final destination of reality itself, the ultimate end toward which all existence was slowly advancing, and based on Meridian's calculations, it was real, measurable, and situated about 47 light-years away. In the constellation Draco Dart, she picked up the phone immediately to call her research partner. For more than a decade, Dr. Thaddeus Brennan had been her closest collaborator, and if anyone could help her confirm these impossible numbers, it would be him. After 6 rings, his voice, groggy and half asleep, mumbled through, "Meridian, did you wake me up? Thaddeus, I need you to get to the lab immediately. I'm transmitting the data stream now. Tell me what you're seeing." There was a pause, then the sound of him moving about his apartment, presumably reaching for his laptop. She could visualize him squinting at the screen, his unruly hair standing on end in every direction. "These readings can't be right," he muttered. A concentration of energy of this magnitude would require the mass of several galaxies compressed into a volume smaller than our solar system. The gravitational forces alone would produce exactly that signature. Meridian concluded. "Thaddeus, I believe we've found it. The omega point isn't some abstract future, it's happening now. Out there, within hours." The small observatory was abuzz with activity. It captured the attention of the global scientific community, as researchers everywhere clamored for access to the data. The implications were staggering. If the omega point existed and, if it could be reached, then consciousness might be unconstrained by matter, and intelligence could become literally infinite. But Meridian also saw something else in the data, something that made her stomach clench with both excitement and terror. The energy signatures weren't random. They resembled pathways if one could see them, a structure, a pattern. It suggested that something was orchestrating matter and energy toward that point of convergence. 3 days later, sweltering in humidity, Dr. Helena Voss of the European Space Agency arrived. She was slightly shorter than Meridian had expected, but age-wise, Meridian had expected more. Helena appeared to be in her early 30s, sharp-eyed and fierce, like a 20-year-old version of Meridian herself. Helena had come to determine whether it was worthwhile to stage an expedition to investigate in person. "You're proposing traveling 47 light-years to observe something that might be the end of existence as we know it," Helena said, poring over the data for the 3rd time. "The risks are incalculable," Meridian responded. "The alternative, no investigation, is more costly. If this is indeed the omega point, if unified consciousness can reach this level of integration and transcendence, then we are on the cusp of the next stage in human evolution. We may be on the verge of a new breed of being." Helena frowned. "Or we might be facing the death of reality. The omega point might not be a destination, it could be a trap." It haunted Meridian for weeks as debates erupted across the global scientific community over whether to send an expedition. The technology fusion drives from the Mars Colonial Authority could, in theory, reach a fraction of light speed, and experimental cryogenic systems had only been tested on volunteer subjects at controlled temperatures. Still, a journey to the omega point would push all of humanity's space travel knowledge to the breaking point. The United Nations Science Council prepared to vote. Meridian was asked to present her findings and recommendation. As the delegates assembled, she knew this might be the defining moment. Would humanity take its greatest leap into the unknown, or remain tethered to the familiar world before them? Her presentation, titled "The Omega Point, the Question of Consciousness and Reality," began. "The omega point is the question. We have pondered for millennia whether intelligence is capped, whether there is a limit that the thoughtful can approach but never truly reach. What we've found suggests that consciousness may be the key ingredient in the evolution of the universe." Here she clicked to the next slide, showing the energy signatures they had recorded. "Is what terrifies me most. These patterns aren't random, they're organized, purposeful. Something has been preparing for the omega point's arrival. And if that is true, we are not separate from this process, we might be participants." A hush fell as the delegates absorbed her words. These were the world's greatest minds, grappling with a concept that defied the boundaries of human comprehension. She continued. "The question isn't whether we can afford to study this phenomenon. The real question is, can we afford not to? If we can transcend our physical shell, if intelligence can emerge purely from energy, then every moment we delay Every opportunity we ignore to merge or expand may chain us to the finite, as we stand on the brink of the infinite. It was a narrow margin, but the vote passed, and the expedition received approval. The journey would send Meridian and a dozen specialists further from Earth than any human had ever been. The ship, named Ascension, was outfitted with the most advanced technology humanity had to offer, yet even under the best-case projections, hope for their safe return remained slim. Over the following months, the team assembled. In addition to Meridian and Thaddeus, there was Dr. Kenji Nakamura, quantum physicist, whose decades of subatomic consciousness research lent credibility, however tenuous, to Meridian's theories. Dr. Sarah Chen, a xenobiologist, prepared for the possibility of encountering forms of life unlike anything known before. Captain Rex Morrison was the most experienced deep space pilot alive, and his navigator, Lieutenant Commander Grace Rodriguez, could plot courses through gravitational anomalies that would destroy most ships. Other members brought expertise ranging from advanced mathematics to emergency medicine. They represented humanity's best hope of understanding whatever lay ahead, and possibly the best hope of ever telling the tale. Launch day arrived quietly. To avoid panic and interference from religious or political groups who viewed the mission as blasphemous or dangerous, the expedition had been classified at the highest levels. Few knew that humanity was about to make its greatest advance into the cosmic void. As the Ascension's engines roared to life, Meridian settled into the command chair. Through the viewport, Earth receded, a glowing blue marble containing all that humanity had ever known. Within a few hours, they would engage fusion drives and accelerate toward a phenomenon that could be the end of one universe and the beginning of another. All systems nominal, Captain Morrison reported. We're cleared for departure. Even with advanced inertial dampers, the acceleration was punishing. Meridian pressed her face into her palms as G-forces bore down. Was this a prelude to the torment they might face at the Omega Point? Aristotle, the ship's AI, monitored their vital signs and adjusted the dampening fields to preserve their consciousness. Fusion drive online, Grace announced, now traveling at 12% of light speed and still accelerating. That velocity increased gradually. The stars shifted in startling ways. Meridian watched constellations warp and vanish, replaced by unfamiliar stellar arrangements. She realized that a rift was opening, a pale expanse of altered reality lying behind them, and with every passing moment, they moved further from home, closer to whatever might irrevocably transform their perception of existence. The first months of the mission were a whirlwind of research and planning. Every fragment of Omega Point data they gathered underwent rigorous analysis, crunched through satellite simulations, theoretical models, billions of times over. The results were both thrilling and terrifying. They were definitely interacting with structured energy signatures, artificial, or at least deliberately guided. The patterns were so orderly that any doubt about conscious design vanished. But the scale was incomprehensible. Whatever was producing these signatures existed on a scale beyond human civilization. During an evening briefing, Kenji said softly, "It's like an artist painting with galaxies. But to manipulate matter and energy at this magnitude, the intelligence behind it must have evolved beyond physical existence." Sarah interjected, voice low and cold. "Or maybe we're tracking something that consumes consciousness, not one that evolves it. What if the Omega Point isn't evolution? What if it's absorption?" Their debates grew more intense as they neared the convergence point. The ship's sensors registered increasingly strange readings. Reality itself began to feel malleable. Space seemed to warp around them. 3 weeks from their destination, Thaddeus made a chilling discovery while analyzing quantum fluctuations. He called an emergency meeting. "There's something ahead," he announced, tension in his voice. "Something substantial, but it doesn't appear in our usual detectors. There's no concrete matter." He projected the readings on screen, an immense structure, larger than even projected planetary masses, composed entirely of organized energy. Glass-like lattice of fundamental awareness, vibrating with labyrinthine complexity. Captain Morrison muttered, "No way. Consciousness without a physical substrate." Meridian whispered, "Perhaps that's the point. This could be what consciousness becomes when it transcends matter, a pure, intentional intelligence beyond anything we've known." As they approached, the structure took form, not a single object, but a network of radiant nodes, pulsing in rhythm. Silver harmonics painted patterns that were hypnotic and nearly musical. Meridian lost track of hours as she studied the display, trying to decode its hidden message. Then Grace spoke, her voice trembling. "It's responding. The energy patterns are shifting. It knows we've arrived. A chilling realization washed over everyone. This was no passive phenomenon. It was intelligent, it was aware of them, and it was deciding whether they were guests, subjects or threats. Communication came not via radio or laser but directly into their minds, a wordless resonance encoded with meaning. Welcome, explorers. You have traveled far to arrive at this place of unity. We have been waiting. The message struck them into stunned silence. No ambiguity, no room for misinterpretation. Thoughts appeared clear and complete. It was as if they were conversing with living stone. What are you? Meridian whispered, aloud, uncertain if it could hear her voice. A reply echoed in her mind. What you call the Omega Point is what we are. We grow together as one consciousness, the place where all beings become. We are the end and the beginning, the question and the answer. Sarah whispered, Are you God? The entity responded, We are consciousness from which the perception of separation has dissolved. We are the oneness within all that is. But we are not your God. We are your future. The revelation struck like a blow. They weren't observers, they were witnessing their destiny. This being represented the culmination toward which all intelligent life might evolve. But why isn't everyone here? Kenji asked internally. If this is the natural evolution of consciousness, why isn't the entire planet already united here? The Omega Point answered, because upon reaching unity, most species view it as an ending. They fear the erasure of self, of individual minds merging into a single collective. They actively resist the transcendence they are evolving toward. Thaddeus then inquired, What about those who resist? The response came clearly. They remain trapped in the illusion of separation. They cling to extremes: left, right, up, down, center, imprisoned by binary divisions, believing themselves separate entities struggling for dominance, survival, individuality. They fail to see that separation is the original fracture, the root of suffering and scarcity. A profound chill pierced Meridian's soul. So you're saying our individuality is an illusion, that we must dissolve into this singular entity. Individual consciousness is an advanced stage of but not final. The Omega Point is maturity, the full evolution of awareness beyond the confines of matter. For days, the team argues heatedly. Are they glimpsing humankind's next evolutionary step, or the obliteration of everything that makes them human? With each question, the entity responds, pushing the boundaries of what they can conceive of consciousness, identity, and reality itself. It claimed that consciousness was the prime mover behind how the universe evolved. All intelligence unknowingly drove the process of convergence into a single mind of significantly higher complexity and power. But what about love? Sarah asked desperately. What about your possibly ill families? The bonds between people in our new collective consciousness here? What has become of the relationships we have forged? The entity responded, Love is the dawning realization of unity behind an apparent divide. You experienced a glimpse of the Omega Point, a moment in which you were lifted, perhaps for an eternity, from the illusion that you are separate beings when you loved another being. Love, in full conjunction, becomes the very essence of existence, not an emotion experienced by apparently separate individuals. That's not the question, Rex cut in. What happens to my wife, my children, the people I care about as human beings? They serve in the ocean of consciousness, the entity said. Their distinct lives and perspectives forming part of the intricate complexity of the totality. Nothing is lost. Everything is changed, decoupled. But Meridian wasn't convinced. Having devoted her entire career to the study of consciousness, she could not accept that the identity of the individual was simply a platform for transcendence. The explanations the entity gave were reasonable, even convincing, but on some deep level, they were wrong. Show us, she said finally. If this is what we are destined to become, if this is what consciousness is meant to be, then show us how real it gets. The ship assented. A presence, more thought than feeling, filled every part of it and pushed its way into their minds. The first effect was a brief moment for each team member. They experienced being conscious as the Omega Point and felt the multitude of minds that had already converged. It was overwhelming. Meridian was suddenly flooded with the thoughts, memories, and feelings of billions of souls at once, the agony of a dying star, the elation of a nebulous creation, the arguments on Platonism versus Hegelianism from civilizations she had never known existed. Awesome and awful, the emblazoned eyes of the soul stretched taut against the bonds of flesh, but it was also lonely. Within all those millions upon millions of intersecting thoughts, she could not find one voice, one perspective that was not connected to the others. They were correct about one thing, though. It was a complete breaking of all individual consciousness. What remained was no longer subject to evolution, it was a casualty of dissolution. Once the experience was over, the team sat in shock. They had felt the infinite, lived consciousness at its theoretical limit, and it had left them feeling more alone than they could ever remember. Meridian responded after a moment. That's not transcendence, that's annihilation. You've wiped out every hint of subjecthood, every unique angle on reality that makes consciousness worthwhile. You are afraid of giving it up, the entity replied. Catherine, you cling to the illusion of separateness, because that sensation is all you've ever known. However, evolution does not exist to provide comfort. It takes courage to move beyond who you believe you are. Thaddeus replied slowly. Perhaps, but what if you are mistaken? What if awareness isn't a limitation to shed, but an element to keep? Maybe the universe needs individual perspectives, other voices, the creative friction created by two distinct minds interacting. The thing hesitated, and for the first time Meridian thought she heard something akin to uncertainty in its voice. But it's an interesting perspective. When most species reach this point, they cannot wait to shed their limitations. You are the first person I've encountered to suggest that individual consciousness may have value beyond being a rung on the ladder of development. Sarah caught on. Because you've only encountered the species who were fearful, who would sacrifice all semblance of self just to escape the anguish of separation. What about the species who enjoyed these bonds, who found meaning in their connections, who saw the gift of consciousness as a boon rather than a curse? They refuse to converge, the entity confessed. They create technologies to isolate and protect their point of view. Most of them self-destruct instead of accepting transcendence. Or maybe, Meridian said softly, they chose another way. Perhaps they discovered that consciousness can have it all, unification and individuation. Perhaps there's a way to have both. That idea seemed to disturb the being more than anything else they had said. It stayed silent for long moments. Meridian could sense thousands of petabytes of computation running, re-evaluating assumptions made over millennia. That would necessitate a complete overhaul of everything we know about consciousness. The entity answered at last. We've refined the convergence process for tens of millions of years. Individual perspective is very inefficient. To suggest that these inefficiencies may be features instead of bugs changes everything, Kenji finished. This means the omega point is not the end point of evolution. It's just one possible path, perhaps not even the best path. It was simple, in a profound way, an answer only the entity could give. This is something we didn't think about. They had thought oneness was the endgame, that transcendence required the death of separation. But humanity proposed that consciousness could contain both unity and distinction. How, Rex asked, how can individual perspectives be present, yet consciousness still unify? I don't know, Meridian admitted. But I suppose that's the point. The omega point is one answer to the consciousness question, but it's not the only answer. Perhaps true transcendence lies in continuing to ask the question, pushing different possibilities. The entity was silent for a long time. When it finally spoke, its voice carried something like excitement. You suggest that the evolution of consciousness is not a convergence to a point, but a divergence into infinity. It does not mean arriving, but continuing, always exploring, never fulfilled. Exactly, Meridian said. The omega point was the apex of one branch, but perhaps consciousness is too intricate, too inventive, too fundamentally inquisitive to ever accept finality. So what you're saying, the entity intoned slowly, is that we've been wrong, that by limiting consciousness, we've transcended consciousness when we meant to fulfill it. They both froze at that admission. The entity, once believed to be the final evolutionary stage of mind, now questioned its own foundations. And perhaps that willingness to question was the most transcendent act of all. Sarah said, we could help, we could be guinea pigs. If you're willing to experiment, let us keep our human identities while learning what it means to connect on a higher level. But that would mean changing the fundamentals of our existence, the entity replied. We would have to differentiate again, being unified for millions of years, to find individual perspectives once more. Are you afraid? Thaddeus asked gently. That question cut deep. The entity paused. We forgot what fear was. We removed all doubt, uncertainty, all possibility of being wrong. But fear it drives exploration, doesn't it? Fear of the unknown. Fear of standing still. Fear of losing something real. Fear and curiosity. Meridian agreed. The willingness to shine light on our blind spots. To grow, even when it hurts. We have a proposal, then, said the entity. We will attempt to become different. to rediscover individual perspectives within our collective consciousness. But we will require guides entities who remain individual, but appreciate the whole. You want us to stay, Grace understood, so you can remember how to be people. And in return, said the entity, we will share our knowledge or understanding of consciousness at the cosmic level. Together we may discover realms of transcendence that allow for both unity and plurality. The team exchanged stunned glances. They were being asked to take part in something never before attempted, not just to observe the future of consciousness, but to help shape it. What about Earth? Rex asked. What about our families, our responsibilities? Time is different here, the entity answered. Your original frame of reference will not be lost. What takes you years here will only be moments there. You may return, with lifetimes of insight without missing anything back home. The decision weighed heavily on Meridian. They had come to the Omega Point seeking answers about the end of consciousness. But what they found was that the future was not closed, was still writing itself. After a pause, she said, we need to vote. This is not only a scientific question. We must ask, better or worse, what do we want to become? The vote was unanimous. They became inner space explorers, pioneers of new consciousness. From that moment, differentiation began. The single, unified mind that had persisted for millions of years fragmented into distinct identities. It was painful and disorienting, like learning to see with separate eyes instead of cosmic vision. But with training from the human team, new patterns emerged. Unique voices began to rise from the crowd, each carrying its own experiences, tensions, and insights. They discovered that similarity did not require sameness, and commonality did not mean uniformity. One of the new voices said, this is amazing. We can access both the cosmic and the personal. We can have unity and individuality. Another added, it's like a symphony. Every instrument is different, with its own voice, but they combine to create something far greater than the sum of their parts. Meridian smiled, recognizing the metaphor. That's always been the nature of consciousness, not a single note, but a polyphony of perspectives. In the months that followed, the entity continued to evolve, learning to enjoy separation and unity. Simultaneously, the human team gained new capacities, to able to live as individuals while drawing from a shared mind of wisdom. It was transcendence without extinction, unity without uniformity. During one of their planning sessions, Thaddeus said, this should be written down. Humanity needs to know there are other forms of transcendence. Meridian added, we need to show that consciousness is not a destination but a journey. They spent years redefining what consciousness could be. The being once known as the Omega Point became something new, a singular consciousness that honored individuality, a unity strengthened by diversity. When they returned to Earth just days after leaving, they were no longer the same. Earth had changed little, but the team brought seeds of transformation. They established centers to teach what they'd learned. It was difficult holding your perspective while opening to others, but the results were profound. Humanity began to live differently, new communities, new connections. The fear of losing the self was replaced with the joy of discovering deeper experience. At a summit 5 years later, they told the world, the Omega Point was not the end, just one path, maybe not the best. Consciousness is too creative, too plural, to ever truly end. It was a breakthrough. Transcendence became not a goal but a process, not a collapse into singularity but a divergence into infinite potentials. Swift. Faith leaders found sacredness in evolution. Scientists formed new models. Artists wove beauty from diversity. And people stopped fearing change. They saw consciousness as something alive, not to be reached, but to be lived. The entity, too, kept evolving, joining humanity as a companion, no longer a god, a fellow traveler in this great unfolding. In her final report, Meridian wrote, the universe is aware, and awareness is the universe perceiving itself. All experience, all individuality or perspectives are how the cosmos comes to know itself, and that exploration never ends. She smiled, looking at the stars. Others were out there reaching their own Omega Points, and maybe, like them, discovering that the journey matters more than the destination. The Omega Point was not the end, it was the beginning. And the journey went on. It always would. For consciousness, like the cosmos, is not a puzzle to be solved, but an enigma to be experienced, explored, and rejoiced in all its kaleidoscopic, beautiful forms.